Hello everyone, I'm Hysterium, and today I'd like to discuss how to DPS as a Scholar. We will go over methods to use when soloing in the open world, as well as how to help DPS in a dungeon. I realize none of the spells I'm about to mention, with the exception of Broil, is a Scholar specific spell. I would also like to say that you should keep in mind that Scholar is a healer first, and DPSing should come second to your role. Let's talk about DPS rotation in a dungeon or duty first. This is by far the easiest to explain, and there's not much you should do or will have time to do. First, we start off with turning Clerk Stance on. Next, we will quickly apply Miasma, then Bio 2, followed by Bio. After this, you can do one of two things if you have the time. First, if Aether Flow is not on cooldown and there's more than one mob, then using Bane to spread your dots is an option. You can also apply Arrow or use Broil. Though in a duty situation, you probably won't stay on Clerk Stance for too long before someone needs HP. The reason why we do these spells in that order is simple. Miasma and Bio 2 have a similar time that they will do damage to the mobs. Bio and Arrow, if you use Arrow, have a much shorter duration and therefore should be applied last in the rotation. Keep in mind that Miasma also has an effect it applies to mobs. When applied, Miasma can also reduce healing potency. This is especially effective when there is a healer amongst the group of mobs. Also keep in mind that Miasma 2 also has this effect, but its shorter range makes it less important for use in duty. Next, let's talk about soloing as a Scholar. I have heard many people mention that they feel Scholar to be one of the harder jobs to solo or do open world content as. I'm here to tell you that Scholars in open world content have far more potential than a class that can't heal themselves, especially considering you have a fairy to heal you. So to start off, let's look at the difference in fairies. Eos is primarily just healing spells and a magic defense up spell. Why I prefer to not use her is we are trying to increase our DPS rather than our healing potency. Selene has Fey Wind and Fey Caress that will come in handy if you choose to solo. Think of it this way, the faster you can kill a mob, the less time you have to worry about your HP bar. I always use Selene and try to keep using Fey Wind whenever it's off cooldown for Selene. Next, let's consider something really quick. If you were to get attacked by two mobs of similar type, then the additional incoming damage is doubled. To remedy this problem, let's think about mobs as incoming damage. How do we stop incoming damage? We kill it. To remedy this, focus in on one mob and apply your dots to that enemy. I'm not saying don't use Bane, but to consider dotting and focusing one enemy at a time rather than trying to keep your dots going or shadow flare up on the entire group. Now let's consider priority, something a healer never has to think about until they turn on Clerk Stance. Basically, we are going to ask ourselves which enemy needs to die first. This is a very important question because Scholars don't have the defenses of a tank and they don't have the offensive power of a normal DPS. Priority usually goes by which mob is weaker or which one is going to be the most bothersome. I usually will go straight for a ranged mob because it is harder to avoid their damage. Sometimes ranged mobs can't take as much of a hit as a melee can. Above ranged mobs in priority is healers. Healers come first for obvious reasons, but it should be noted that as a Scholar, Miasma and Miasma 2 should help to remedy a bit of that. Lastly, I consider position much like a tank might. How can I get these mobs to group up? Why I do this is so that my Shadow Flare, Bane, and Miasma 2 hit the maximum amount of mobs. Now that we have an idea of what we should attack first, let's talk about the spells. It's a good idea to not neglect that Protect and Stone Skin button. Treating yourself like a party in a duty is a key to your survival. Yes, that even means switching off Clerk Stance and applying Adlo or sometimes even using a Sacred Soil. You have them, so why not use these spells? The first thing I always start off with is making Selene cast Fey Wind. I'll immediately begin casting the dot rotation I mentioned before. Miasma, Bio 2, then Bio, but this time I won't hesitate to use Bane if there's more than one mob. Next, I'll do a little trick with Broil while my dots are still up. If we consider that Energy Drain is second to Broil in damage dealt and that Energy Drain is an instant cast ability, we can effectively chain these two spells together. So to start off, we will cast Broil, then just as it's nearly finished casting, we can use Energy Drain, then immediately Arrow or Ruin 2. I recommend using Ruin 2. So again, that's Broil, then Energy Drain, and finally Ruin 2. If you're lucky, then you just did roughly 2,000 or so damage to a single target. Before you have Broil unlocked, you can also do this with Ruin, but it's not nearly as effective damage-wise. For this, we just simply replace Ruin with Broil. So instead, it goes Ruin, then Energy Drain, then finally Ruin 2. It's okay to waste these 8th tier stacks, as you'll likely not even need them for open world content anyways. Aside from those spells, using everything else you might also have helps. As a scholar, you really have to throw everything you have at the enemy. If you do this, things die much quicker, and like I mentioned before, the faster things die, the more likely you'll survive. So throw down Shadow Flare and use Miasma 2 as well. Lastly, Stance Dancing, as it's commonly called, is a must when soloing. Another thing that will only make your life easier is deployment tactics. You can apply Eye for an Eye onto your fairy, then use deployment tactics to spread the ability to yourself. This also works with your companion Chocobo as well. Well, that's it guys. Practice makes perfect, so get out there and try this stuff out. I hope this helped you, and as always, if you have any comments or questions, please ask them below. And until next time.